So take me here because you talked about emotions and the piece of your work that I've gotten to hear a bit about that's so fascinating to me, especially speaking to really home builders. We've got a lot of wives and mothers who listen to this
hmm
conversation. Um, Talk to me about how we find firm foundation in the midst of a culture and probably an upbringing that was fairly focused on emotional experience.
The first thing that kind of pops in my head as I think about your question is regulation of our nervous system. And this
Ooh,
isn't
okay.
exactly where you're going, but it's really important, I think, to understand the emotion reason complexity. So there's two things I want to talk about here, Anna. I'm going to talk about what a regulated nervous system looks like. And then I'm going to talk about where emotion and reason are in the brain and how God kind of sits himself right in between there.
Welcome to Overwhelmed to Overcomer podcast with coach, encourager, and strategist Anna McLaughlin. If you're a Christian woman who has big dreams rooted in an even bigger God, but most days those dreams feel completely out of reach, trust me, I get it. As a homeschooling mama of 4, entrepreneur, investor, and all around wearer of many hats, I am right there with you. And yet, the Lord invites us to live out our God given purpose now in the midst of the madness. So, let's explore together how we can know our calling and walk in it today with clarity, with courage, with each other. It's time for you to live the life you love and love the life you live. Let's do this thing.
Hello and welcome to Overwhelmed to Overcomer. We have a treat today. Dr. Angela Deulen is here, and we are going to talk about the brain and the spirit and neuroplasticity and growing before the Father from glory to glory. Angela, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It is a privilege.
It's wonderful. Can you tell us just a little bit about your breadth of experience, who you are?
Of course, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional clinical counselor here in the state of California, where I also have the privilege of being a professor of psychology at a Baptist university down here in SoCal. And I write, I have a YouTube channel, and I love discussing our faith.
Yes. So I listened to one of I so friends, listen, I nerded out on Angela's information, stories, content, and I just encourage you to take a gander, go ahead and search on your podcast channel after you've listened to this conversation, all of the breadth of just conversations that she's had. Each podcaster comes at it from a little bit of a different angle. But one thing that I heard you talk a bit about was how you came to faith in the Lord. Can you tell us
Mm.
about that?
Yes. So that I you talk about nerding out. I grew up in a background where I was basically taught all roads lead to God. Doesn't really matter what you believe, you'll get there. And I got to be 18. I had just graduated from high school. It was a couple days out of high school. And I went, that doesn't make sense.
Mm,
All roads lead to God. We have a really wishy-washy God.
yeah.
And I couldn't fathom that. And this is in the 80s, right? So there's a library and I grew up on Maui, so it's a small library.
Yeah.
And there's no internet. Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, isn't out yet. So I spent 6 months, maybe 9 months at the library just going through and researching every religion that I could possibly think of and trying to understand these different constructs of God and looking at the historicity of these religions and using that historicity to understand any validity that might exist or not exist for these religions. And when I got done, I came down to two religions, and it was Christianity and Judaism.
Mm,
And then you're trying to decide, well, Do I think it's Judaism? Do I think it's Christianity? And then you have to wrestle with the who's Jesus. So
Yes.
then I spent another several months just digging into who's this Jesus figure? Was he real? Was he, um, goes back to an argument that I would hear later in my Christian walk. Was he liar, lord, or lunatic, right?
Yes. Didn't C.S. Lewis bring that up? Wasn't that in Mere Christianity or was that somewhere else?
He introduces the idea, but Josh McDowell is the one who really built the argument around
Okay.
that.
Okay.
And so, but this is before that.
Oh
And
no.
so
You're like, where were you
I
guys?
had C.S. Lewis. I had C.S. Lewis. But in the end, I really came to believe that Jesus Christ was Lord, that he was God incarnate in the flesh, and he died a substitutionary death. And on my 19th birthday, I gave my life to the Lord.
So talk to me about this. I find it so powerful because so many conversion stories, including my own, I feel like the beginning was an emotion or maybe kind of an inspiration, but yours was an academic endeavor. So how has that informed and because for like and I'll just say by contrast for me, then there was this point of circling back. And you talked in another podcast episode about or actually it was on your YouTube channel about spiritual dryness and like okay, when there's an emotional connection and then you don't feel that warm fuzzy feeling, then we need to go back to a foundation. And so I know for me and for others when the warm fuzzies dried up and I was like, well, maybe my life isn't that different. Is it really? What do I do? Then I had to build the foundation later and go backwards. But you started with this academic argument. How has that informed your faith over the years?
Um, it's funny because people that know me will tell you I'm a pretty emotional person and pretty dramatic, but I'm also very analytical.
This is
And
actually me too, Angela. No wonder I like you so much. I'm like, yeah, that's about right.
yeah,
Which those things don't often live together, I find. But that's like the, the lawyer and the little spiritual side of things and similar to what you're talking about. Okay,
yeah.
go
So
ahead.
I just came at it from this really analytical place, and I think that knowing that process of just wrestling with the evidence until I was sure, until I knew, has made, as I've gone through spiritual journeys, has made emotion in dry seasons less relevant and more sweet and more powerful and more impactful when I do experience it.
Yeah.
Because I'm always falling back on not a sense of emotionality, but I know who he is.
Mm.
And when you think about it, this is the only relationship, our spiritual relationship is the only one where mature people, when the feelings dry up, question the relationship, right? I mean, think
You're
about this.
right.
Like we fall in love with, our spouse, and at some point the warm fuzzies fall off. And mature people don't say, "Oh, see, it must not have ever been real."
Yeah.
They have things to fall back on, like, I know my husband's still a good guy, or, we have this commitment together. You have a structure that you fall back on. But in
Mhm.
faith, we go, yeah, I'm just not feeling it. And people will go, see, it must not be real, and they'll fall away. I mean, imagine if we did that with our children.
Yeah.
We don't always have warm fuzzies towards our kids,
Yes,
right? I mean,
accurate.
sometimes that's just hard.
Yeah, that's right. Which I'm just gonna note because my people will love this. The whole like Angela, the whole reason I got to dig deep on Angela is because our first conversation had to be cut off because my children were losing their minds. And I was like, can we just reschedule? So as you know well,
Yeah.
yes, this is okay. So what is it about faith? What do you have any thoughts on why it is that we do that in the context of faith where we couldn't, I mean, we would call someone a sociopath if they dissociated from their children every time they made them mad, which of course, sadly some people do, but it's not the mature person like you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that Western Christianity, and especially American Christianity, has it is so emotionally centered and so experientially centered, right? We want to make sure, I mean, churches go through a lot of trouble and expense to curate a worship experience
Mhm.
rather than just cultivating disciples that then can have genuine encounters with the living God.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of that's just cultural. I think when I am privileged to discourse with Christians from other countries or different backgrounds, I'm always struck by the robust and richness of their theology and their Christian maturity in comparison to what we experience in the American church. I
Mm.
had two gentlemen, brothers, um, that are their family left a persecuted country. Um, and I'm trying to be kind of careful with their identities, but I had them in my office. These guys are in their 20s and I was just so blown away by the maturity of their faith, by the depth of their theological understanding of who God is in a troubled time, about their ability to think through religious and even political nuances with complexity. And I just don't see that even in, you know, older Christians in our country as a general rule.
Okay, so oh, I'm so tempted to dig back into your origin story more of like why Christianity, why Judaism. Okay, here's what we're gonna do, and I'm gonna put a pin in where I really want to dig, but I'm gonna just take a little trowel right now. Okay, can
Okay.
you talk to me about? You said you had to choose. You narrowed it down to Judaism and Christianity.
Hmm.
Why those two?
Those were the two that I really felt had the historicity, that had a story that was consistent across generations, centuries, that I looked at other religions that either did not have that kind of historical background or very often were changing or re-updating their theology. I'll give you an example. I remember being, I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and we were living in Utah at the time. And so the Mormon church, if they did something big, it was on the news because we were in Utah. And I remember this would have been late 70s, but the Mormon church did a this big change in theology about people of color and what level of heaven they could reach. And I remember just being so shocked, just sitting there. I mean, I'm 7 or 8 years old. I was so confused because one, the fact that God wouldn't let people of color into certain levels of heaven, I didn't know what to do with. But the fact that the church changed its
Mm,
teaching on it was really confusing because I thought, well, the truth should be the truth and it shouldn't change
yes,
just because the times are changing.
yes.
And I found a lot of those kinds of changes in the different religions. I found it in Islam. I found it in some of the Buddhist teachings and
Mhm.
Hindu teachings that I was looking at. I did not find those huge kind of mega changes in Judaism, Christianity. There
Mhm.
were fluctuations in the nuances of doctrine. For example, different times women could do this or women couldn't do this, but
Mhm.
not these big kind of earth-shattering doctrinal changes. And that's why I ended up with those two.
Wow. And two things come to mind as you're talking. The first is that Francis Schaeffer, a theologian, I'm sure you're familiar, a theologian from the 70s, 80s,
Hmm.
established L'Abri Fellowship, which is it's French for the shelter, and it's a place to go and dig into these theological questions. And he built L'Abri on two premises. I went in my early 20s when I was
Oh,
just in that to the England one, just south of London, and it was a beautiful time. And the two premises, and I was in a time of transition, and the two premises that he built L'Abri on are, if Christianity is true, it impacts every area of life. And most importantly, and what makes me think of this in our conversation is it can withstand all scrutiny,
yes. Yeah.
right? Like it can be picked apart to pieces. And the second thing that I really want to underline, because there are a lot of mothers that listen to this podcast, is may we give our children credit. At
Hmm.
7 or 8 years old, you could see it.
Hmm.
And of course,
Yeah.
not at the depth that you would be able to articulate and argue it, decades later in adulthood after years of study. But we um, we don't give our children. I think we're too quick to assume that it's going to be over their heads just because maybe it took us time to learn, or it's a complex concept to articulate. But they can they can identify, and it what is it, the making it clear to children but confounding the wise, is, or the
Yeah.
confounding the,
Hmm.
oh, I'm losing the scripture, but basically like that he reveals these things to babes,
Yeah.
and he planted that seed in you a decade before you were like, let's really settle this thing.
Yeah.
So it's profound. Okay. So now my pin, we're coming back to where I want to really dig in and transition. Thank you for sharing your conversion story. I think
Hmm.
it's really powerful in this age of emotionalism to say this isn't a fancy,
Yeah.
this isn't just what we grew up with. This isn't the culture we live in. There's a
Hmm.
bedrock that we stand on even when we don't realize it.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So take me here, because you talked about emotions, and the piece of your work that I've gotten to hear a bit about that's so fascinating to me, especially speaking to really home builders. We've got a lot of wives and mothers who listen to this
Hmm.
conversation. Um, Talk to me about how we how we find firm foundation in the midst of a culture and probably an upbringing that was fairly focused on emotional experience.
The first thing that kind of pops in my head as I think about your question is regulation of our nervous system. And this isn't
Ooh, okay.
exactly where you're going, but it's really important, I think, to understand the emotion reason complexity. So there's two things I want to talk about here, Anna. I'm going to talk about what a regulated nervous system looks like. And
Mhm.
then I'm going to talk about where emotion and reason are in the brain and how God kind of sits himself right in between there. So the first thing is our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, has two sides. It has a sympathetic side, or what we call the sympathetic nervous system response. And then we have the parasympathetic nervous system response. The sympathetic nervous system response, this is a continuum. And so if we're all the way over on sympathetic nervous system, that side controls arousal. If we're a little bit on that side, we might be alert for a quiz or a podcast.
Mhm.
But if we're all the way over there, we're in fight and flight.
Okay.
The parasympathetic nervous system side is associated with what we call rest and digest. You have to be a little on that side to digest your food or to have, good blood pressure and blood sugar levels. And you need to be all the way over on that side if you're going to be able to be asleep.
Okay.
So if we have a well-regulated nervous system, we can kind of stay in this middle ground where we might lean a little on the sympathetic nervous system side, because we need to be alert because a car just cut us off on the freeway, but
Mhm.
we don't want to be over in fight and flight and then, wanting to chase them down, the freeway and hurt them,
Yes.
right? We
Yes.
want to be a little over, but not way over. Or if we're having a good meal. It's Thanksgiving. We're getting ready to record this a week before, right?
Yes.
It's something like that. Then we want to be able to be a little bit in a rest and digest place, but we don't want to be asleep when we're eating or driving a car or guesting on a podcast. So
Right.
that unfortunately what happens is a lot of us, because of our upbringings, because of the culture that we live in that's just incredibly stressful and very noisy, our devices keep us in on the extremes. Usually we're way ramped up on the sympathetic nervous system side, and so we're dysregulated. Now, that brings me to then the second part. Our brain, we have a midbrain. I'm going to use my hand. I realize listeners can't see that, but if a person is listening and they make a fist and they tuck their thumb in, then where their fingers are, that's our frontal lobe. And our frontal lobe is where reasoning is. It's where we process right and wrong. It's incidentally where empathy and altruism are, but it's also where impulse control is. Critical thinking is up here, thinking before we act. All of that's here. The emotional part of our brain, if you made a fist and you tucked your thumb into the middle of the fist, that where that top of the thumb is the midbrain. And the midbrain is the emotional part of us, specifically in the amygdala, which is a part of the limbic system deep in the center of the brain. And that amygdala is what triggers fight and flight responses when it's activated. If we are constantly living in this emotional place, then our limbic system will be upregulated. Here's the catch, Anna. The limbic system, that emotional part, and our frontal lobe cannot be on at the same time.
And the limbic system, is that the same as the amygdala?
The amygdala is in the limbic
In the
system.
limbic system, and
Yeah,
it can't be on at the same time. Does that mean you can't
exactly.
live in both worlds at the same time?
Exactly. So you're going to be in the emotional part of your brain with fight and flight, with anger, fear, sadness,
Mhm.
or you're going to be up in the front of your brain with empathy and altruism, with higher order reasoning, with thinking before you act, with critical thinking, with good decision making. You can be in one or the other. Now, here is the fascinating piece. There's a structure at the back of that prefrontal cortex that connects to that limbic system. It acts as a fulcrum. It tells us whether we need to be in fight and flight, or we can come into our frontal lobe and be with empathy and altruism and good decision making and thinking before we act. All of the things we call executive function. That anterior cingulate cortex, that structure that connects that frontal lobe and the limbic system that acts as a fulcrum, is what we believe is the God spot, where we connect with God.
What?
Isn't that crazy? And
No,
all
tell me what that means. Like it's the God spot. It's turning something off and on, but what is it?
when people are, when we scan their brains during prayer, meditation, spiritual experiences, that's the part of the brain that lights up. Now, that always makes me think of this thing I call the Davidic arc. And that's my term. It's not probably theologically sound, but if you take a psalm, like I was reading Psalm 22 this morning.
Yes.
Oh God, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, that was at the crucifixion, right? That's what
Yes,
he
Jesus,
said. Oh,
Jesus quotes it on the cross. And David starts out, where are you? My enemies are surrounding me. They're winning. Everything stinks. It's dark, and I'm alone. Where are you? And by the time he gets to his Psalms, so he starts in this very limbic state, right? By the time he gets to the end of his Psalm, he's like, but I know you're good. I know you're God. I know you've got me. I know I'm sheltered under your wing and it's going to be okay. And it's like that in that God spot, he goes from that full amygdala, limbic system distress to this place of trust and rest, and it's going to be okay.
oh. Okay, so here's what this brings up for me. And some of this is something I want to make sure we draw in that I heard you talk about too. Um, so I think I'm going to pose the question first and then ask you to dig in a little bit to emotions like anger. But what it brings up for me is I think as a woman, as a mom, um, there's this feeling of like, well, I don't want to stay in. I think of like, okay, amygdala bad, fight, right? Fight, no, is that the right? Yeah, fight or flight.
Fight
I'm
and flight.
hijacked, bad. And so my temptation is to push it down. Be like, nope, we're not going there. And that's something we talk about on this podcast a lot. It's just I talk about pushing the balloon under or pushing the beach ball under the water. And if we
Yeah.
try to do that, it'll pop back up. Okay.
Exactly. And the science says that, right? The science
Yeah.
says if you try to ignore an emotion or push it down,
Yeah.
you actually intensify it.
Okay.
And this is why I think the Psalms are so helpful
Yeah.
because it gives you a place to really process instead of pushing down the emotion, to process the emotion.
Right.
And then that quiets the nervous system and brings you back into that frontal lobe. And you know what? Just you and I were talking about stewardship and just how, as women, we want to be good stewards of the life that Christ has given us in our bodies and in our homes and in everywhere that God allows us to have any influence.
Yes.
When we live in that sympathetic nervous system state, it increases our blood pressure. It puts us at a higher risk for diabetes, heart disease. It shrinks our telomeres or damages our telomeres, which is a part of our genetic. It's a
Oh, it's
protective
the
cap at the end of our
DNA,
gene.
right?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a protective cap at the end of our genome, and that damage to those telomeres puts us at a higher risk for all forms of disease, but especially cancer. It increases our risk of dementia as well as other mental illnesses. There's nothing good. This is what I say to people. Being in a heightened sympathetic nervous system state is really good if you have to run away from a bear. But if there's no bear, you're really just damaging your own body. And the more you're in that nervous system state, and we're not meant to, I think that's the reason I think it's 300, it might be 365 commands to not be afraid in scripture.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I mean, there's buckets just at the beginning of Joshua alone. It's like
Yeah.
half a dozen times right there.
Yeah. Do not be afraid
Yes.
because that's not good for us.
Hmm.
God gave us what we need to be able to run away from a bear or to fight, a bad guy if they happen to walk in our home and threaten our children. But he also has given us everything we need to be able to rest and trust in him.
Yes.
And when we do that, then that brings us into that frontal lobe where we can really love people as Christ loves us.
Mm. Hey, friend. Are you looking for a peaceful getaway where you can just breathe? A backdrop to your next hilarious girls' weekend? Or the destination for that crazy family trip? If so, our family would be honored to host you at our sweet retreat, Just Like Paradise. Located a block from the beach in beautiful family and dog friendly Oak Island, our home is perfect for families, group retreats, or even a solo or couples getaway. You know you need it. After years of praying over this home and asking others to do the same, peace is just baked into the walls. From the Three Seasons back porch to the fire pit, from the hot tub to the kids' room fully stocked with all the games, we've thought of everything to give you just the getaway you've been looking for. Simply send me a text at 704-810-1181 to skip the fees and enjoy an additional 10% discount on your next stay. Just mention the podcast. I've got you covered. We can't wait to host you at Just Like Paradise. Okay, so talk to me about this one then. I'm recalling some times in my life where there, and these are kind of the deep hurts, but we feel that I know someone who's listening like can find that spot. They feel that certain kind of way in their spirit. And so what about those times where it's like that hurt? It was a betrayal. It was a big wound. We go before the Father, and at the end we can say, "You are God. I magnify your name," but that feeling's still there. What do we do with that so that we're mindful of the cost? Like it's like I don't want to hold on to it, but it's still there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think that it's so important to give ourselves permission to sit with those feelings. Jesus grieved, right? He looked over the city of Jerusalem and wept. Um, I think it's important for us that we live in a microwave culture. We want everything quickly and we want to
Yes.
feel better quickly.
Yes.
And I just don't think that we're designed for that. And I don't think that's what it means to be in the, we're created in the image of God. And he's a relational God who has some pretty strong feelings in scripture. So I don't think that we're supposed to just, kind of, pray it out and be over it. I think there's a lot to be said for what happens in our own sanctification when we have to walk through a season that is painful because somebody wounded us or somebody betrayed us or we had a painful loss, something that we experienced that was just unbearable. In 2023, my our 30-year-old son passed away in his sleep. And
Sorry.
you go back to your last phone call with that person, you're processing. It's just you're going through their clothing and doing their laundry for the last time you're ever going to do it,
Yeah.
and that process is just so incredibly painful to lose a child. But I wouldn't, I mean, I would love to have my son back, and I'm grateful I'll see him again. But I also wouldn't substitute the sweetness of the Lord's fellowship in that painful season.
Yes.
And I can say that about other things when there's been betrayals or big breaches of trust or wounds, that there's going to be friction. Where there's people, there's going to be friction. And it's that friction and having to walk through that I think aids in our sanctification and teaches us what it means to uh, partake in the fellowship of his sufferings.
Hmm. Yes. And I'm sorry for your loss, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's I mean, unthinkable. And I know what you mean. We've actually talked about that in this podcast after the loss of my dad, of how grateful I am that we don't have to choose. Like all that came into my hands from the Lord, all the ways I know him. I now know my role as his daughter in a way that
Mm,
I couldn't conceive of before. And it's a gift that you can't get without the cost.
yeah.
Because that sanctification is so costly, it's
Hmm.
all the more precious.
Yeah.
Mm. So, so we sit in these places and we come before the Father in our pain and we give ourselves time. For the woman who's maybe feeling like, hasn't it been long enough? One of the things I thought that you talked about in another podcast I thought was so profound was really and we're gonna struggle. I'm gonna struggle in the brain terminology, but you were talking effectively about how anger lives in the limbic area,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
that if not reckoned with, and kind of if we just keep the beach ball pushed down, or we kind of say, done. I'm sick of talking about it, sick of dealing with it. I don't want to pay for therapy anymore. I don't want to work through it. I don't want to talk about it. Something happens. It spreads. Is that right?
Yeah, it really does. So anger, was this, it's a limbic system response. And, the word tells us to be angry, but in our anger, not to sin. We're never told not to be angry. We are told to be careful with that anger. And I believe it's because when we don't address the anger, when we stay angry,
Mm.
It morphs into bitterness and contempt, variations of hate, basically. And hate spreads through from that limbic system into other parts of the brain and can actually cause a lot of damage to the brain. It increases what we call oxidative stress. And so the cells oxidize faster and it damages more free radicals, right? So it damages the neurons in the brain. But it also creates a type of cognitive rigidity that results in what we call limbic friction, meaning we lose the ability, it's a breakdown in the neurofibrillary bundles. I don't want to be too technical, but there's a breakdown in the fibers basically around that anterior cingulate. And that limbic friction then keeps us stuck in the limbic system. We lose our ability to get into that frontal lobe, which is why it's difficult. You and I've talked about this earlier, why it's difficult for some people then to even reason
Mm.
anymore. They've
Okay.
lost that. Hate has actually damaged that part of the brain that allows them to get into that frontal lobe. That means they don't have empathy and altruism. They don't have perspective taking. They are not thinking properly. Their reasoning is experiencing a deficit. They choose poorly, and we wonder why they choose poorly. Well, they've damaged that part of the brain associated with choice.
Oh my goodness. Which as you're saying this, in a way, it's like it gives me so much compassion
Yeah,
that, it's not like that person wants to be difficult. They by their willful choice to not willful or not willful, their choice to not reckon with their pain. Is it unforgiveness or is it dark? Like would you say unforgiveness has the same impact, or is it when it turns to bitterness, or is there a difference?
they're linked. They're
Okay.
linked, right? If you don't forgive, it's a matter of time before that anger turns to bitterness and contempt. These variations of hate that damage the brain. So you can look at it from the unforgiveness lens or from the hate lens. They're really just two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
And I like you, I have a lot of compassion for those individuals. I think when we're discipling, we have to understand that the part of the brain associated with choice is broken. But
Mhm.
it's an important reminder that sanctification doesn't happen in these big things. It's the small, everyday decisions that we make that really either sanctify us, make us more and more like Jesus, or more and more like our old nature. It's those little choices that, like to forgive, the person who cut us off on the freeway. It's those little choices that result in our sanctification, much more so than the big ones.
And then by this token, so would you describe forgiveness neurologically? Is it a choice or an emotion? Right?
Yeah, yeah. It begins with a choice,
Mhm.
and I would call it a process of letting go that starts with a choice to forgive. And we we think about it, the difference between decisional forgiveness and the process of forgiveness. So the first step is making a decision to forgive, but that doesn't mean you're going to be, I mean, think about it like where we usually talk about this is when a spouse has had an affair. You can make a choice to forgive that spouse, but you might stay angry and hurt for a while.
Yeah.
And you might have to keep working several times a day on forgiveness, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and that's the process. But if you stick with decisional forgiveness, you'll get through the process of forgiveness. And over time, it will re-regulate the nervous system, and you won't have all of the ugly emotions that go with a betrayal.
Mm. I really want to highlight what you just said because I've had people say to me, in the past, oh, I must not have forgiven them. How am I still angry? And this distinction is so powerful because I think sometimes we can turn inward and feel guilty or angry that we're not
Mhm.
done, which then brings us back to the earlier conversation of we go before the Father again. We're in the Psalms. We're kind of giving that time and that permission to let Him untangle all that comes with those deep wounds.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And in that sense, I think of emotions as a gift because they keep us close to the Father. Um, I don't think we're not supposed we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and that includes our emotions. We're supposed to have them.
Yes.
It's what we do with them that is healthy or unhealthy. And if you allow those emotions to keep you close to the Father and you're processing them, through them, then you'll get there. Just be patient with yourself and live in the grace God's already given you.
You know what I love? Like for such a intellectual, deep conversation, it all comes back to the same place, Angela, doesn't it?
It does.
Oh, I like my heart. I heard you talk in another podcast about John 15 of being the branch on his vine, which is that's the passage I'm really living in this year, John
Mm.
15. Um, and I know my people are like, oh, here it is again, The True Vine by Andrew Murray. We've read so many times in this conversation or in in the larger Overwhelmed to Overcomer conversation. But it's there's such depth to plumb, and then I can't remember which theologian it was, maybe R.C. Sproul or Chuck Swindoll, I'm not sure, one that's died in the past 20 to 30 years, maybe, was asked, and he'd written just prolifically. Maybe it's someone even different. Um, he was asked to sum up the gospel, and he looked at the person who asked this question and he said, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible
Mm.
tells me so.
Yeah.
It's just that easy. And then we get to dance around in all the complexities and then in, special fields of study like you have. And then it just comes right back there to the
Yeah.
foundation.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's so many more places I want to go, but take me here. You talked a bit in one of your pieces of content that I listened to about mirroring and kind of how and I'm let me see if I get this right, but I'm thinking specifically for the parents that are listening, that the emotional state we're living in is kind of catching. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think maybe you're talking about mirror neurons.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so mirror neurons, first, let me just clarify. It's a confusing term. I wish they would have named them something else, but because mirror neurons aren't a type of neuron, it's a behavior of neuron where, we're wonderfully relational in our design. That's the way God made us. When have you ever looked at somebody, Anna, and when they yawned, you yawned too?
Yes.
Yeah. So what happens is when we have a functioning mirror neuron network, whatever my neurons are doing, yours are going to resonate in kind. It's kind of like for any of your listeners that might have a music background, if I had a room full of pianos, if I went, let's imagine they're all tuned, and I went and I plunked middle C on one piano, they're all going to start vibrating in middle C.
I've heard that. In like in
And
a Steinway store? Yes, I know what you're talking about. Okay.
yeah, so it's kind of like that with our neurons. So if you yawn and I have working mirror neurons, then I'm gonna catch your yawn. Or if I walk in the room and you're clearly crying and you're in distress, my neurons are going to start firing in sync.
Hmm.
And I do think, to your point, this is why it's so important to be regulated in front of our children because our dysregulation is their neurons, if they're empathic, their neurons are going to fire in sync with ours. When we study this behavior, this mirror neuron behavior, there are two groups of people that don't have functioning mirror neuron networks. People with moderate to severe autism spectrum disorders and psychopaths and sociopaths, what we call antisocial personality disorder. They don't have those, um, they don't have functioning mirror neuron networks. So the more empathic person is, usually the more, this is one of the reasons therapists really have to take care of themselves, right? You sit with people in
Mm,
distress all day, your brain is firing in sync with theirs, and you have to be able to, kind of go home and reset.
yes. Okay. So take me here. We were talking about what happens when someone's in that state of like I'm choosing not to forgive. I'm choosing anger and the cancer's spreading. How do we navigate relationships when we have someone in our life who's maybe making those choices in light of this n mirror neuron conversation? Did I catch the words okay?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
you did. So how do you navigate a relationship with somebody who's violating boundaries consistently?
I guess who's I mean my colloquial language is like who's toxic, like who's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I would call him a boundary buster, but who's
yeah,
toxic?
yeah. Because are we
So
gonna are we I mean I think about I've got someone in my life where my husband and I's phrase for it is they got me. Like, oh,
mhm,
they got me, and he's like, he'll say, I just watched you just start going down the mountain. Like I'm going
yeah,
down in my emotions. I'm starting to lose my ability to think, and I call it I'm underwater. I can't think anymore. Um,
yeah.
does that make
So
sense? Like
yeah, no,
what?
I understand what you're asking. So for me, when it's somebody at church or somebody in the community or a client, I make sure that I'm monitoring. That if just being aware that your neurons want to fire in sync with theirs, when you can be aware of that, you can say, okay, I'm going to not let my brain do what their brain is doing.
Oh, we
When
can kind of
it's,
tell our brain to,
yeah, yeah, don't let your brain do that.
whoa. Okay.
But if it's somebody like I have a family member who is very mentally ill, and I have to be very mindful, and I have to manage my energy. Um, I'm close to this family member, so I have to. I'm not going to cut them off. I don't believe cutoffs are biblical,
Mm,
but I have to kind of monitor and say, I've got 60 minutes of emotional energy for this person. I don't have, 3 hours. I have 60 minutes. And so I put a
mm,
boundary around it and then I protect that because I know that if I'm with somebody who's in distress for I spent some time recently with a dear friend who has schizophrenia and is in an active state of paranoia, and that distress can really wear on you. So you say, I have got this much bandwidth for it. And then you
yes.
protect that. And
Mm,
and you give yourself permission to know. I always say to people, Jesus knew when to feed the masses and when to get in a boat and row away.
yes.
And so, I want to be a person who shows up and is completely present and gives my whole heart, but doesn't give what I don't have to give,
Yes.
and knows when it's time to get in the boat and row away.
Yes. Mm, okay. All right. So what I hear you creating is effectively boundaries based on time, based on
Hmm.
energy.
Hmm.
Okay. And then shift me over to the other piece. You talked about the importance of us as parents in being regulated
Yeah.
because our children will mirror will sorry will mirror neuron the mirror neuron thing will happen.
Yeah.
So um what's the work? Is that like, hey, I'm gonna go step away? Like what would you say? Because I feel like especially for those who are listening who have little ones in the home, sometimes they're the reason that we're getting unregulated. And so then is that like we're taking a time out, or what are the tools when you look at it from a brain perspective, what are the tools that bring us back?
So there are some kind of short term in the moment things, and then there are some more long range goals.
Mm.
Um, Short term, be slow to speak and quick to hear and slow to wrath. Know that if you are in that limbic system, you are not in a place to parent. You are not in a place to make a decision. You are not, make
Oh,
sure
because you
you
can't live in both at the same
you
time.
can't. No,
Angela.
you can't. You're not going to be reasonable. Dan Siegel, in his book, Parenting from the Inside Out, he uses that hand brain analogy. And he says, if you're in your limbic system, you've flipped your lid, right? The lid being the prefrontal cortex. You have
Yes.
flipped your lid, and you shouldn't parent from that place. And I would just say, I think that's biblical, because if you
Right.
are in that limbic system, you will not be slow to speak and quick to hear and slow to wrath. You're going to get it all mixed up. You'll be quick to speak and quick to wrath and slow to hear. So
Yes.
you need to
Okay.
be able to walk away and make sure you're back into your frontal lobe, and then come back and have a conversation with your child that's, age appropriate about
Yeah.
what they did, and why it was wrong, and what's going to be the consequence or the result of that. I think long term is something I wish I wish I would have realized how over anxious I was as a young mom.
Yeah.
I was constantly in that sympathetic nervous system place.
Mhm.
And as a result of me just having a lot of high functioning anxiety and needing to perform and curate my image and all of those kinds of things, I created anxious children in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. They're all great, successful, wonderful, just good human beings. We always told our kids, we don't care what you become, we care who you become. And
Oh.
they have
Yes.
all just, become good humans.
Yes.
But I do, that's one of the things I look back and think about. I wish I had regulated my nervous system much earlier, because when you have a regulated nervous system, I didn't even know I was an anxious person.
Hmm.
Um, when you have a regulated nervous system, then your neurons are going to be firing in just kind of this peaceful, God's got this, we're content kind of rhythm that will help your kids fire in that place. But if you're wound up, their brains are going to fire wound up. And the more empathic or sensitive your child is, the more true that is.
Hmm.
The more they're going
Yes.
to absorb that.
Yes. So then, so this is very resonant for me because I had kind of compounding levels of postpartum anxiety because we had 4 kids in 6 years, and so by number 4, I was really not okay. And having grown up in as quite a dysfunctional young woman and had some healing, it was like I was healing and then I was also getting worse at the same time because I was having all these children. And so speak to, because I know I'm not alone. There's a lot of women who navigate postpartum challenges or who just are living in the tyranny of the much and are feeling that kind of constant overstimulation of like toddlers underfoot, and now someone burned their hand, and now someone dropped something in the kitchen and there's a loud noise, and so we get into this sympathetic. So talk to me about what you would say to the woman who's like, I know I have been really, really anxious as a parent, and I'm committed to moving out of that, to moving into more of the parasympathetic, or to finding that God spot that you talked about and living in that place of connection and commune with him, calming down, being able to be present. What's the work? What would you say?
You know, the low hanging fruit, and there's a catch 22 to this, because I remember what it's like to be a young mom. The low hanging fruit is to practice the spiritual disciplines. Prayer and meditation, Thanksgiving, gratitude exercises, all of that increases blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, which quiets or dampens that limbic system. So it brings our anxiety down and it brings us back to that front of the brain. The reason I say it's a catch-22 is when you're a young mom, it is so hard to get 10 minutes
Yes.
of peace and quiet to be in the Word. So you have to get kind of creative, and it really does require a godly, supportive husband who will say, let me take the children for 20 minutes so you can have a quiet time, right? That's not a big ask, the
Yeah.
20, 30 minutes. Um, although I know that not all partners can or will,
Yeah.
but that's the easiest like point of entry is in terms of regulating your nervous system is just to practice the spiritual disciplines. The other thing is community. So until the Industrial Revolution, women spent a big chunk of their day with other women. You went out together to harvest or to, cure meats for the winter, or you all got together at Sally's house on Thursdays to darn your socks and do your mending.
Yes.
Women did community together every day. And what that did, it allowed women across different ages to talk about what's normal when you're pregnant, what's normal after you've given birth. My husband did this. Is this normal?
Yes.
I'm going through the change. Is that normal? Like, there were ways that women could connect all through the day and have conversations where they didn't feel like they were so isolated. We now as women are siloed so much. Men are too,
Yes.
where we just kind of are, whether we have a vocation or we work at home to care for a family and children and be a homemaker, that's work. I've done both, that's more work. Um,
Yeah.
Regardless of the situation, we are kind of siloed and we don't have enough conversations around, just had my fourth baby in 6 years and I'm feeling kind of anxious. Anybody else? And so community is just so huge in normalizing, helping us to understand um, what's normal, what's not normal, and that validates us. When somebody
Yes.
says, "Oh, that's not normal. I don't know why your husband did that." That's validating.
Mm-hmm.
Or, "Oh yeah, husbands do that. I have to pick up my husband's socks all the time too." Validating, right?
Yes.
So, those things are that there's just no substitute for community. That's what it means to be in the image of God, is to be a relational being.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we're going to get back to center. We're going to get in community. And then just from a brain perspective, here I think this is where I want to land the plane because I'm looking at my list. I'm like, there's so much more great stuff, but I feel like this is going to really center us and ground us in what I think my perspective today in November of what my people need in March. And we'll just see what the Lord does with it, right? So so take us home. Let's go back to the brain. What's happening when we do this work? When we choose to walk into this regulation and we lean into the spiritual disciplines and just say, come what may, the alarm's going to go off. I'm going to sit in my little prayer spot and I'm going to go before the Father and let him love me. What's happening to us and why does it matter?
Well, it increases blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. It nourishes the whole brain. Blood brings oxygen, nutrients, and water, which your brain needs. There's no neurotransmitters can't do their job without water. So it brings all of those things to the brain, but it really nourishes and upregulates the frontal lobe. When our frontal lobe is nourished and upregulated, it's going to quiet that limbic system. So it's going to quiet the sympathetic nervous system that keeps us in fight and flight or over arousal state that, raises our blood pressure and our blood sugar and all of those things that we don't need. It's going to increase theta waves. It's a particular electrical pattern in the brain that is associated with feelings of contentment and peace, and I'm going to be okay. But it's also going to improve our immune system. We're going to get sick less. It's going to lower our blood pressure, and we're going to be healthier physically and cognitively in the long run as a result of doing that. And that's going to help us show up better with our families. It's going to help us show up better with our churches. And it really then primes us because it also strengthens that interior cingulate, that God spot. It really then primes us for neuroplasticity, which is changing the brain to be more like Christ and less like our old selves.
You said this in a podcast. Neuroplasticity is critical for sanctification.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that allows our brains to change. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so neuroplasticity refers to this phenomenon where the brain rewires itself. It can rewire, it can change old thinking habits, it can form new neural pathways. And the more that we use a particular thought pattern, the faster that thought pattern, that neural pathway becomes. So if we're thinking, I'm no good, I don't even know why I try to be a mother and a wife, I should just give up. They'd be better off without me. If that's my thought pattern, every time I think it, it's going to get faster and faster. Or if I think, I'm a daughter of the King. I am created in his image, and I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and he's going to walk me through this. It's hard. Maybe I didn't have good role models or good examples, but I've got this because Christ is in me, and greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. If I think that way, it's going to get faster and faster and faster each time. Well, that's neuroplasticity, the ability for the brain to change and rewire itself. And that is the foundation. The fact that God created that, he designed us for that, is just so beautiful and special because it's a foundation then for sanctification. That is the process by which we become more like Christ and less like Angie or Anna.
Oh, and it months and months ago, somebody asked me to do a podcast episode on just wrestling with perfectionism.
Mm.
And um and I just had this niggling of like, I don't have it yet. I don't have it yet. And then the Lord brought to mind that verse, and I think this is part of why we as Christians get caught up in this. Christ says, "Be perfect as my heavenly Father is perfect." And I
Mhm.
was like, I think, on some level we're like, oh, I'm supposed to be perfect, so therefore perfectionism is the path to perfect. But when I looked at the verse, it came at the end of a conversation about love. And that
Mm.
really that perfection, I think it's from the Greek word, I could be wrong. I think it's from the Greek word telos, which is kind of like completeness or finish.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Is that
Complete
right?
mature. Yeah, um, complete mature, perfect. There's one other word in there, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
basically what it
Is that where
means.
it's like not lacking in
Well,
anything?
yeah,
That's from the
teleos.
yeah, okay. Okay. And so what I hear you saying, Angela, that's so profound is um that that coming to this, that this is the path to love, right? Is
Hmm.
that going through this process, we're being sanctified, we're being perfected in the sense of him finishing his work in us, which of course will be ultimately finished. It's a I was a classics major, so like the ancient languages, there's this idea of like past. It's like there's a continuing, there's a
Hmm.
perfect past, but then there's like the imperfect is like continuing, right? And so
Hmm.
there's just this idea of like it's perfecting, but it's not done yet, and it's not done until eternity, or
Right.
but that we become perfected by this, by practicing being in the presence, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
so it all comes back to just where we landed in the middle. We go before the Father of heavenly lights, who doesn't change like shifting shadows,
Mm.
and let him love us.
Yes.
And then we can listen to conversations like the one that we're having now and go, wow, there, it's all scientifically, it's all real. And we can use words that Anna doesn't understand to talk about it. And yet it's just as simple as and not easy, especially if there's little ones in the home, but it's just as simple as I rise in the morning. I love in John at the resurrection, it's like while it's still dark, like Jesus couldn't
Hmm.
even wait to rise, may we also rise in the morning while it's still dark and go before the Father and
Yeah.
just let him love us and let him shift and change us that we might love more.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. Any final word of encouragement, Angela, before we wrap up?
What strikes me right now that you've asked me that is we become what we pay attention to. We can set our mind on things above, or we can set our mind on all of the yuckiness here below. But whatever you choose to pay attention to is what you will become. So set your mind on things above, set your mind on Jesus and um, just who he is, and light and love, and that's what you'll become.
Angela, this is amazing. How would you like my people to connect with you? Because I know they're going to want to do so. This has been such a gift.
People, if they want to find me, they can find me on my website, which is just angeladeulen.com. And I would love for people to check out my YouTube channel, which is Dr. Angela Deulen.
Wonderful. Okay. So, Angela, thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation, and I
It really
appreciate
was.
you.
I knew it would be wonderful, and it really has been. Ah, and to you, friend, thank you for being here. Just like Angela said, may you go before the Father. May you become like him. Think about those things as I think it's Philippians says, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is perfect, whatever is noble, whatever is lovely, whatever is excellent or praiseworthy. Might have gotten some of those nouns wrong. Whatever is of God. Think about those things. And as Angela said, literally neurologically, that's what we become.
Mhm.
Until next time, as always, you've got this not because of anything in you, but because he's got you.
Friend, thank you so much for listening to this most recent episode of Overwhelmed to Overcomer. So listen, the whole idea behind this mission is that when we endeavor to be brave with our lives, we need to do it together. Belonging is key. So if you resonated with the message from this episode, share it with a friend. Do it together. Thank you again, and never forget, you've got this because he's got you.